I hope everyone had the opportunity to read Larry's reflection this week on the 4th of July about the Liberty Bell, or that you were here last Sunday to hear him talk about it. I learned a whole lot. I didn't know the inscription on the Liberty Bell. You all know it now. It says, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land." Throughout the land, to everybody, not just the white men who wrote the Constitution. Proclaim liberty throughout the land. But I also learned that that is from the Bible. It is from the book of Leviticus, where it is talking about the year of Jubilee. Leviticus announces that every 50th year is to be a year of liberty, a year of liberation. Now, it's not really the 50, it's the fact that 50 is the year after 49. 49 is 7 cycles of 7 years, and it's that number 7 that is significant. But this 50th year is a year of freedom, of liberty. First of all, it's liberty for the land, because it's a year in which there's no plowing, no planting, no cultivating. So that also means that it's a year of liberty from toil for all of the laborers who would be doing that work. It is a year of liberation from debt. Debts are forgiven that year. Property is returned to its original owners. It's a year of liberty for slaves who are set free, and for exiles who are set free and allowed to return home. Now, historians aren't sure that Jubilee ever really was a thing that happened. But as Larry said, even the idea was hope for those who were poor and oppressed. So as I was reading and thinking about Jubilee and liberty, and also reading and thinking about the first lesson about Naaman, I started wondering whether or not Jubilee was also a year of healing. I wondered if all of the lepers and the blind and the paralyzed were liberated from their afflictions that year. One of the privileges that I enjoy as a Presbyterian pastor is excellent health care, and I am sure your Episcopal clergy do as well. But it has been a priority of those who manage the Board of Pensions for the Presbyterian Church, and for that I am forever grateful. Now, Jerry and I have enjoyed quite good health. We have never made much use of our health insurance until this year, when both of us found ourselves having surgeries. And we became acutely aware of inequity, of our privilege, and of the injustice for those who don't have it. We had our choice of hospitals and doctors. We could seek second opinions. We could have all of the scans and tests and medications we needed. We had therapy and follow-up care. We have a couple of refugees who are staying with us who gratefully have at least Medicaid, but they have no choices. They can barely find any doctor who will take it. The World Health Organization says that half of the people on Earth don't have access to even basic health care. So I also had to wonder, suppose it had been the slave girl in this story who contracted an illness. What do you think her options would have been? Maybe you saw the story in the news this week about a bus caravan of women with type 1 diabetes who were headed to Canada to buy supplies of insulin, because in Canada, insulin costs 1/10 of what it costs here in the US. 1 out of 3 people with diabetes chooses to ration or stretch out the amount of insulin that their doctors have prescribed and feel that they need. They don't take it in that amount so that it will last longer because of the cost. Medical care is the #1 cause of debt in America. Every year, 500,000 families have to declare bankruptcy. And 70% of those are because of medical bills. We gratefully have something called, quote, affordable health care, and yet 27 million Americans can't afford even that. And of people who have health care, we're told that 1 in 3 will not go to the doctor when they ought to because of the cost of their deductibles. Now, Naaman, that wasn't his problem. Naaman had all the resources he needed to seek whatever health care he wanted. He was a military commander of the army in Aram. Aram would be modern-day Syria. And Aram and Israel were longtime enemies. They had had many battles over the years. He was very high-ranking, about as high as you could go, like the 4-star general or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He had his military victories and his successes had given him great favor with the king of Aram. And yet, they had not been able to prevent him from contracting a dreadful skin disease. The text calls it leprosy. It might not be what a doctor today would diagnose as leprosy, but it was certainly a painful, disfiguring skin disease that had humiliating social consequences. It identified the bearer as being someone unclean, all right, someone you don't associate with, as someone whose stigma was a result of their sin, so it was seen as being his fault. Naaman was also a man of great wealth, and when he heard that the prophet in Israel might be able to cure him, he set off to pay for it. He took a boatload of money, a massive amount of gold and silver. He took horses and chariots and clothes and servants and headed off to Israel in a grand procession of wealth and power. But he would discover, as many of us do, that even wealth can't always buy healing. Now, the servant girl, who is the true heroine in this story, is the perfect foil for Naaman. She is the exact opposite. She is the consummate non-person. We don't know her name. Naaman actually is the only person's name that we know in the whole story, except for Elisha. We're not even told the names of the kings. She was as small and insignificant as Naaman was big and mighty. She had been carried off from her home into slavery in a foreign country. She might have been bitter and resentful, but instead her heart was filled with kindness and compassion. And when she saw Naaman's plight, she told her mistress of a possible cure. Naaman went first to the king of Israel, who was aghast. He knew that he didn't have any ability to cure leprosy. He saw this as just an excuse from the king of Aram to start another war. And so he publicly tore his clothes as a sign of impending doom. When Elisha heard about it, he said, "Send Naaman to me." Now, Elisha was not put off by the fact that Naaman was one of their enemies. He wasn't put off by the fact that he was a pagan, that he was a foreigner. And he certainly wasn't impressed by his wealth or his status. I think perhaps because he wanted Naaman to know that his healing, that he wasn't the source of his healing, that God was, Elisha didn't even go out to greet Naaman personally. He sends yet another unnamed servant. Poor guy. I mean, what a job to go out and confront this fierce warrior. But he takes the message that he should go and wash 7 times in the Jordan River. Well, Naaman is highly offended. He is outraged by this. First, because he hasn't received the respect and dignity he thinks he deserves because of his status. But he's a big man, so he thinks that his healing ought to be a big production, right? He thinks this prophet ought to come out and wave a hand over him and call upon God, and that his skin would be healed in a big production. Naaman also thinks that the Jordan River is just beneath him. The Jordan actually was kind of a dirty little stream. Back home in Damascus, there are these big, impressive rivers, which he thought would be much more appropriate for someone of his status. So he turns around to go away in a huff, and yet again, unnamed servants step up. This time, it is his own servants who summon the courage to confront their master and encourage him to give it a try. You see, Naaman needed healing from a lot more than his skin disease. He needed healing from his misconception that his security and his well-being lay in his wealth and in his power. He needed to let go of his ego and his self-reliance. And don't most of us need to do that? To his credit, that is what he did. And the story tells us that his skin was restored like that of a young boy, and perhaps like that of a young slave girl as well. This story about Naaman was told again and again. It was passed down from generation to generation over the centuries. Everyone in Israel knew it. Everyone in the synagogue knew it. Jesus knew it. So when Jesus began his ministry and he announced that he had come to bring good news to the poor, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set the captives free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, the year of jubilee, of liberation. Well, the people at first were amazed and Jesus, do this for us here in our hometown. But Jesus reminded them that Jubilee was not just for them. And he reminded them of this story and of the story of Elijah. He said, remember in the time of Elijah, there were a lot of widows in Israel, but God sent Elijah to the widow outside, the widow over in Zarephath. And remember Elisha? In the time of Elisha, there were a lot of lepers in Israel. But it was Naaman. It was Naaman the Syrian who was healed, who was cleansed. Jubilee and liberation are God's plan for everyone, for all the world. We might say that God's health plan is universal. It's not just about individuals having the resources to go and pay for the treatment they choose, but it is about all of us caring for the health and well-being of one another, the rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the insiders and those we see as other, those on the margins. In today's gospel lesson, Jesus commissioned his followers and sent them out to heal the sick. And he commissions us and sends us as well. How can you and I be agents of God's healing? Well, first, I think we can be advocates for justice. We can insist that every child of God, everywhere, deserves access to health care. But we can also be with those who are sick, those who are suffering. We can go to them and be the presence of God's healing love. So may it be. Amen.
Amen.